thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been enjoying your insights that are shared via LinkedIn. I really love this platform, and I'm excited for the final project that's going to come out of these very amazing interviews. So congratulations.
Thank you. And your leadership comes highly regarded or highly recommended by international leaders. So I'm very keen to get your insights. But before we get into the future of leadership, can you share with us your own journey and your own background? Can you tell us where are you from?
Absolutely. So I was born into Zonkizizwe township. My mother was 17 and my father was 22 at the time. And my family lived in abject poverty. So my very first home was a shack. You know, we lived in poverty, and I was born in 1993, which was, just 1 year before our first democratic elections. And, very humble beginnings. We lived in the township for about the first 2 to 3 years, but, there was always that sort of like inter-party conflict going on now that the power had been transferred. And so we moved to Rosettenville, which is in the southern suburbs of Johannesburg, where my grandmother was cleaning houses, my grandfather was fixing cars. And this is where I would start attending church around the age of 3. This is where I learned how to speak English, was in church. And, while we were still living the life of very poor people, living in back rooms and very small living spaces, we definitely had a lot more access than one would have in like a township, township upbringing. I was closer to the library, I was closer to a school, the clinic was right there. And I was able to enjoy those benefits as a little child, because that's where I would grow up in Johannesburg, in Rosettenville.
And tell us,
I was just going to say I lived there until I was about 13, and then graduated. Yeah.
And tell us, Mpumi, what was your dream career as you grew up?
I remember wanting to be a social worker. I don't think I really understood what social workers did, but I liked social workers because living in the situations that I faced growing up, I was exposed to social workers a lot, especially when my mother was diagnosed with HIV, and we started going through that reality of her struggling with that virus, and eventually I would be orphaned, which brought me closer to the social work system. So I really looked up to these, mostly what I saw was women who would help people like me, and I really liked that. Then I wanted to be a lawyer. I think I'd watched a movie where I was a really good lawyer, and I wanted to do that. So it's really interesting looking back. It seems like I've always been in sort of like the social space, working with people, although it's interesting because now I'm back in that same space, not necessarily working in those professions, but certainly working on the ground with people.
And tell us, Mpumi, who or what inspired you to really reach for the stars?
Yeah, my mother. So my mother was about 25 when she was diagnosed with HIV. Yeah. She died at 27. And before she died, this woman, it still blows my mind. She sat me down. I was about 8 years old. And she told me that she was HIV positive. She told me that she was going to die. And it's as though she could feel the fear in my body, because as I was starting to cry, she held me by the face and said that I must go on because I would be different. And she made me promise to always work hard, to go to school and be good to my grandmother, stuff like that, always believe in God and all of that stuff. And it really changed my life, I think, because even though as young as I was, I didn't know what HIV was. I knew what death was because the year before she had suffered a miscarriage. So I understood as a child that wherever my little brother had gone is where she said she's going to go, and I wouldn't see her again, which is why I had the emotional reaction. But she really inspired me because even in my early teens, I would look at my mother's life and I would think, wow, such a young life, lost, and what people are most drawn to is the stigma and the shame that surrounds the way she died, versus looking at the life that this person lived, looking at the social conditions that she was exposed to, looking at what the world was like and what that meant for a young African girl who was not able to complete school, what that meant for that life. And so that really drew me. It was my own mother's life that pointed me towards social reality and understanding socioeconomic issues at a more personal level, because I really identified, I understood poverty, I understood, exclusion, I understood poor education. I understood all those things, and I saw how they affected a life. And so I had a lot of questions as I grew into this more aware individual and furthered my education. But she's definitely the point where I just took a different turn in terms of how I approach society and the sort of questions that I have. But my drive has always been my grandmother. She's the most hardworking person I know. She became my mother and my father. She was about 58 when my mother died, and I was orphaned, and she stepped right in and raised me like her own, and so I would see her wake up early in the morning to go clean people's beautiful houses that she could never own because of her skin color and social inequalities that existed. And she's my inspiration till this day. So yeah, they're both very close to home. It would be my mother and grandmother for sure.
And tell us, Mpumi, would you say there was a turning point in your career?
Well, it's interesting because, I just technically started my career, but it's very clear that I've been living my career. It's interesting when people say, what's your brand? What's your brand? It's my heart. It's what I've cared about. This is what I've been doing my whole life, But it's interesting because the true turning point for my life was the opportunity of attending the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa. I was about 13 years old. I was found while attending Rosettenville Central Primary School. And obviously, I was brought into an environment where I was addressed as a leader from the moment I walked in. Mind you, I had no idea what a leader was or how a leader leads or lives. And yet I was addressed as one myself. And the world and its possibilities opened up once I was at that academy. And even though I wasn't able to fully realize it coming in, because you're coming from a whole different social reality, I'm glad that during my time there, I had several turning points where I had to learn and reconfigure my relationship with failure, because I had to understand that to be successful, I need to become very comfortable with failure. Because if I'm gonna figure out a solution, it means I have to be willing to fail at its attempt about 100,000 times or 10 times or whatever until I get it. And so it was really being at a leadership academy that spoke life into the concept of leadership and pulled me closer to the reality of leading in some way or another. And that would shape my later teens, and definitely as I move into my early 20s, still one of the biggest, it's what's changed my life. It took me from a world stacked with no's, a world full of impossibilities, to now I have a world-class education. Now I'm able to research. I mean, I got funding to research. I was on a Quest fellowship program where I could research what this HIV thing was, and I could research how someone like my mother was exposed to it, and I could research how it impacts people who are poor and living in very dehumanizing social conditions. So I had a space to now get into the minutiae of how these socio-economic issues come about and how they ultimately affect women and girls like me. And that was a turning point for sure.
So, Mpumi, what would you say is driving you today?
Just the simple awareness of the fact that we're not the first to be on this earth and planet, and we're certainly not the last, but we do have an opportunity to make an impression. I think of my little cousin who's just started university. She's in Soweto at UJ Soweto campus. I think of her, and I think of the world as she's experiencing it. And I always think, how can I make it better as someone who has come before her? I think of the children who I hope to birth and enjoy this life with someday. And I think about how I want them to perceive themselves as children of the African soil, but to also how they imagine leadership. You know, my whole thesis in life is stepping into the truth of who I am and leading in what I believe in such a way that I am able to break free and tackle some of the social misconceptions around what a leader is and who should lead. Because everybody is a leader and everybody should be able to lead, you know, and that's my drive is until we reach that sort of mindset in society, then it's all the more reason why, you know, we should fight for equality and opportunity for people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds, to have an opportunity to be of service and to be used in a way that's for the greater good. And my mission is to share my story, not just to amplify the message of, you know, of understanding people and seeing past the stigma and statistics, but to share it as a way of modeling how to share your story so that you can use it as a fuel or as a launch pad that propels you into bigger opportunities, because your story is the one thing that nobody can ever take away from you. And its ability to open doors for you rests solely on your ability to communicate and embrace it. That's just the truth, you know. So that's my drive, is being an evangelist of that truth and embodying it in every possible way that I can as I live and try to make sense of my own life and be of service in my own way.
Thank you. And Mpumi, let's talk about the future of leadership. What does the future of leadership mean to you?
The future of leadership for me, you know, it means a place and a time where it can be clear to us again that, you know, there's no perfect time to lead. There's no perfect time where all the boxes will be checked when you have to be of service. That moment comes for everybody at different times, and when it appears, we should all be able to step into that. And currently what we have are these social inequalities that exist that serve as a barrier to some of the people and the leaders that we need right now. Some of our best leaders are trapped in poverty in the townships and in the rural areas, and they're unable to break through those glasses and those social barriers because of state issues that are accountable to our government and statement. And so, you know, when I think about the future of leadership, I'm thinking about a time where we can move past these barriers that can be easily removed when we have, you know, when we have government and leaders of integrity who do their part in terms of ensuring a good and stable society, so that our leaders can be empowered from all walks of life to step up and move forward in whatever their destiny and their leadership is. So that's what the future looks like to me, where a child in Soweto and Alexandra and, you know, Kunu and KwaZulu has the very same capability to step into a leadership and opportunity as the same as a child from St. Stephen and St. John's, Sandton, or Johannesburg. You see what I'm saying? Right now, there's still a big imbalance there. And the sad reality is that that's potential. That's brain power, that's heart, that's passion, that's trapped in social issues that shouldn't even be a problem if we are a nation that is focused on doing what's right so that our people can live as the best possible versions of themselves. You know, that's the future.
And Mpumi, tell us, what is it that you've learned from your own journey that you really consider important for building future leaders?
The power of your story. I mean, truly, the power, I mean, your story is your truth, you know, and it's powerful because, you know, what it does is it builds, it establishes compassion, number one. So people who are only limited to what they've seen on TV, when they encounter my story, they gain a deeper appreciation for living the life that I've lived and understanding what it takes to bring a difference to those realities. Now, unless I have the courage to bring that forward, then that conversation won't happen. And if that conversation won't happen, somebody will tell it. The difference is it won't be me. The importance for these conversations happening is, you know, while for me the whole motivation in sharing my story was to definitely fight the shame and the stigma that I felt every time I wanted to talk about my mother and I couldn't, that bothered me. While that was my primary goal, to just shake that stigma and defy that as much as I could, what's been revealed to me is that my story serves a really critical part in conversation of what the HIV/AIDS experience is on a global perspective, which is important for understanding what the solutions would be. For instance, I say when I'm speaking to our global markets that you need to understand that there is a stark difference between somebody living with HIV but also having access. Someone like Magic Johnson is a very different case to what my mother lived, because we were in abject poverty. We're living in a very close space where anyone can become contaminated. I was only 9 years old and I had to watch all of that. So there's a story and there's a truth there. And the reason it's important for me to share is because now I think we're on about 7 million orphans, if I'm not mistaken, AIDS orphans. I think around the early 2000s, it was around 5.4 million when I first started. But I wanted to share that because I also understood that of that, let's say it's 7 million.
Yeah.
Have been orphaned due to AIDS are people living in poverty, you know. So if I don't share my story now that I have an opportunity to international platforms, then that narrative gets lost. People in those social conditions feel alone and isolated because nobody's brave enough to say, I'm one of you and you're not alone. You see what I'm saying? So
is that 7 million orphans in South Africa?
The sub-Saharan region. Let me just pull it up to see. Because, you know, we in the sub-Saharan region have the highest prevalence. So if you look at South Africa, you look at Swaziland.
Yeah.
Let's see, AIDS orphan statistic. But it's very high. And I understand why it's important to bring that to awareness, because, you know, if we're all ashamed, then how are we going to move the conversation forward? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So like in 2012, we had 5.6 million in 2012.
Yeah.
And this was just South Africa. So then Swaziland and all of that. And so if I'm afraid to share my story and I'm on a global stage and supposedly leading, then what's the point if not for hopefully just a certain percentage in that larger population being able to say, oh, I identify with that. I know what that means. I'm one of them and I'm not alone. So leadership for me is really being able to tell your story, to articulate where you've come from and what it's taken for you to get to where you are, because that's how you connect with people who want to be led. That's how you establish your influence, you know. And your ability to communicate and articulate yourself does not mean it's not your ability to speak a certain language. That's not what we're saying, right? We're saying your ability to use yourself as a human being to communicate. For me, it was through speaking. People can do it in different ways, but to just put your story on the map, because what that initially does, it just connects you to a population of people that you didn't even know you were a part of. It connects you to a community that you can then focus on learning how to serve. That's the first thing. But I definitely say that, you know, skills around facilitating and organizing are at the core of leadership. There's no way around it. I've learned this with my own journey, where I went from just creating this campaign purely because I was frustrated after Karabo Mokoena died and what was happening in South Africa, and it's still the high prevalence and all of those, really frustrated. And I just wanted to create a space where we could bring girls and boys together so that we could start figuring out our own solutions. That is now morphed into this Africa sort of focused initiative. And even while I'm the person who is negotiating some of these donor relationships, you know, and negotiating how people can give at scale, I'm still the person who needs to who needs to be on the ground and facilitating and putting people in place so that the work can be done on a daily basis. So that's something that we it's a muscle that we can exercise very early on in our lives by taking on leadership positions, you know, stepping forward to help. I don't care if it's church and facilitating the choir or helping out in a program. because you never know how all these skills are going to show up for you in the end. You know, if there's an opportunity to lead at school, whether it's being a prefect or whatever, take it. Take it, because that builds a skill set where you can work and organize and be with people and take on a leadership position that starts to build over time. And now I'm able to do this at an international scale. I have 4 community partners, 1 in the United States and the rest in South Africa. And as this initiative grows, that's going to grow, and our impact is going to grow as well. And I'm able to do this because the groundwork of facilitating and the groundwork of organizing has already been taken care of, and I'm able to speak very clearly when I'm with people to say, this is the vision, therefore this is your role, can I hold you accountable? Those are all very necessary communication skills that our leaders need to have, sure.
And tell us, Mpumi, what would you say are the most critical success factors for leaders in the future, for the future leaders to really meet the challenges of tomorrow? What are those, what should they do more of and what should they do less of?
Right. You know, I would definitely say the very first thing that what I've observed from successful leaders in the world that I've had some sort of personal interaction or have been able to learn from it at very close proximity is that, you know, these individuals are rooted in their leadership. You know what I'm saying? They're rooted in, I just saw, so for 2016, it was 7.1 million people living with HIV. So our statistics would be lower than that. It bothered me that I didn't know that figure. But yeah, because it's changing so rapidly. But, you know, these individuals who lead are very much their own. They understand themselves. You know, it's very hard to lead when you don't know who you are and what exactly you're here to do. Now, that sounds really extreme because it's one of the complicated, it's one of probably humanity's most, you know, biggest question. Who am I and what am I here to do? And for some people that takes a lifetime. But, you know, when you are able to do the groundwork, and this groundwork is necessary for every person, even for myself as somebody who went to a leadership academy, I still have to do the groundwork of really getting into the minutiae of what it means to be Mpumi. Who am I? What are the things I really care about? What are the things that I could wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and just start hashing out? You know, those things are critical because when you lead, it becomes evident very early if it's something that you care about or not. And we've seen in many of our leaders who have led in ways that they have no business leading in, right? And that distortion happens when we don't take time to really decipher who we are, what our gifts are, what narrative or social conditions speak to us, and how we can bring that to serve our higher selves. Because you see, you need to do this to serve your higher self so that you can serve others. There's no way you can give to other people what you don't have for yourself, which I think gets lost a lot around leadership. So it's definitely, the first thing is to take the time. And this is an ongoing thing. I mean, I'm still discovering myself. I'm still setting new goals. I'm still growing. I'm only 25. But there's so much value. There's so much value when you have what Gary Zukov calls the seed of the soul, where you understand very clearly, you have just a clear idea or a clear feeling of what it means to be you. Because what that means is, as you lead and you're faced with trials, you're faced with temptations, you're faced with many things that call to question somebody's leadership, you're able to function from a place of integrity because that very first alignment is in place right there. So people who read self-help books, people who do the necessary work to face things that you have, you know, childhood traumas, all these things show up in your leadership, all of them. There's nothing that you go through in your own private life that does not show up in your own leadership, how you treat other people, insecurities that you may have around certain things, you know, issues that just show up. And the best way to clear that in order to have an authentic leadership experience, I think, is measured by how capable you are able to do that inner spiritual work behind the scenes. These people have, you know, they have ways of life. They meditate. They have a discipline about them. They educate themselves. They take time to take care of themselves so that they're not running at a deficit on any standpoint. And these are individuals who have really taken time to understand what it takes for me as a full human being to function at my capacity and what it takes to get there. And that work needs to get done. There's no way around it. There's no way around it, because with every leader, when you break down every leader, you're confronted by a person. You know, Barack Obama is Barry, who grew up in Hawaii. That's a person. Sure. A person who had habits and had traits and. So you have to confront that there cannot be double standards where you think you can get away with fighting and living a certain reality and then managing a public persona, because pretty soon those things start to clash. It shows up. It's inevitable. It always shows up. So that's one thing around leadership. But I'd say, you know, now more than ever, I think people should step forward with courage in their conviction of what it is they're about. And, you know, people are leading from the music industry. People are leading from the arts. I mean, leadership is not just being president of a country. Leadership is you believing that there is a greaterness that we can ascend to, and you committing yourself to getting yourself and your society by virtue there. That's what leadership is. So if you do it through music, if you do it through being a chef, if you do it, I don't care. Whatever it is you're here to do it so well that it inspires other people. But let go of the idea that you have to be a certain way. You have to come from a certain background to lead. That's just ridiculous.
So Mpumi, can you share with us a success story or two where you established certain leadership principles for the future?
Well, you know, all around what we're doing right now with Share Your Story Africa, where, you know, we're having to put in place systems that we understand very well systems that are going to pillar our legacy. So, you know, the things that we do now are so crucial. And what happened with this particular campaign and how it came to life was, you know, after losing my own grandfather to AIDS last year and then being in South Africa to bury him, and then seeing what's happening with the domestic violence and all these young women and girls who are being killed and raped in brutal ways, you know, that fire and that passion just fueled me to move forward very, very quickly. And we did that. We raised funds very quickly. People knew about us very quickly. And this was all happening while we were still learning who we were. So very soon I started realizing that we're going so fast that we're doing great in some areas, but we're not doing so well in some areas because we're moving too fast, you know, because that's the thing with modern technology and the advent of social media. You're able to create a campaign in real time and go full blast very quickly. But now the measures that have to be set in place for leadership of what I am obsessed with, you know, where it's accountable leadership, that takes time to build. That takes time. And so slowing myself down and saying, okay, wait a minute, we're moving too fast. What are we doing? Who are we? What are we about? And these are things that I had to learn solely based on what we've been doing through our conferences and summits. Who are we? What are we about? What do we believe in? What is the thing that makes us just go alive with passion and fire? Once you've figured that out, you have to start with the why. This is what Simon Sinek teaches in his Golden Circle principle. Start with the why. Why are we doing this? Who are we? And then go forward into building the necessary infrastructure for you to be fully who you say you are. You see, because that alignment is important. And that has set the right platform and the right tone as we move forward into our future. You see what I'm saying? And it has set up the right infrastructure for our own type of leadership. Now, we could have lost track if we were looking sideways to see who's doing what or trying to compete, because then you're not focusing on what you're meant to focus on. You're now looking sideways. So for me, the biggest success story would be how we went too fast, too soon, and how realizing very, very early that, wait a minute, we need to draw back a little, We need to figure out what we're doing at scale. We need to figure out the why. We all knew it intuitively. We all knew the emotion of why we should be here doing what we're doing as young people with young women and girls in South Africa. We all knew it, but did we know how to articulate it? Did we know how to structurize it and create order to it in such a way that it's easier for people to join our mission? No, we hadn't done that because we had just been moving forward with passion, passion, passion. And so once we realized that, we said, okay, this is important, because if somebody cannot clearly understand who we are, then how can they clearly commit to the goal that we're wanting to share with the rest of the continent? And that was a big lesson, to say passion, drive, grit, all of that was great. We had that in the beginning, but there's still the organizing, there's still the facilitative component that you just can't go around. You cannot. You've got to address that, you know, and that makes me feel good, because while it was very difficult to slow us down, knowing very well that the world is watching, people know we pledged to hit 100,000, which once Oprah Winfrey matches is about 2.7 million. Well, maybe now it's probably about 2.5 because the rand has gotten stronger. You know, that thing could have easily been the drive to say, no, I want to be that person and I want that social whatever. But that's not what's important. What's important is, are we really who we say we are, and are we really what we say we're about? And that takes time. That takes time. So but that's important for how you lead in future. Yeah.
Now, Mpumi, who would you say are the role models of leadership that future leaders should study and maybe take a leaf from?
Oh man, there are several. You know, Simon Sinek, who I'm revisiting his literature now for a workshop that I'm hosting in February, is definitely one that I believe, you know, people should really, really look to understand. I'd say Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart is a profound writer who has put out The Power of Now, the you know, Stillness Speaks. He's put out A New Earth. Because to lead is really to lead yourself. You understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
So you must understand how the world works. You must understand what the world is. You must understand how the world got to where it is, right? And Eckhart Tolle is just one of those people who is great at putting the world in perspective, right? Which is important for how you will be informed as a leader moving forward, definitely. And then there's a writer who we love in our office. I think his last name is Buckmaster Fuller, who speaks to the power of leadership. He said something so profound about, I'm going to find it for you right now, but it really inspired me so much. Buckmaster Fuller. It inspired me so much because that quote speaks to, it speaks to systems that are currently in place. And it says, you know, there isn't really a big win or a gain if you're focusing on the current system and you want to change that. The best thing to go about in doing is to carve out your own new system, is to go ahead and understand that we're living in different times. That's a call for a different sort of leadership. And that inspires people like myself to say, how can I show up? You know what I'm saying? So I'm gonna find his let me just find his name. I know exactly who to go to, because I think he's really important for people to know about. Hey Jane, what's the name of that scholar? Is it Frank Baxter Fuller that we love? Who talks about the different systems?
Oh gosh, actually don't know.
We studied him here. It's Buckmaster Fuller.
Oh, Buckminster Fuller. Yes.
Buckminster Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller. And what's that quote about systems?
What about systems? I'm just gonna see what Google search there.
Yeah.
Never change.
Yes, that's it.
Why? Hold on.
It's so powerful.
Change things by hiding the reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
Yes. So Dr. Nick, it's Buckminster Fuller, And the
Right.
quote is, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Thank you.
Okay.
I mean, that's just, that for me is so ahead of its time, you know.
Right.
So ahead of its time. And it brings a sense of relief when you're looking at social conditions or you're looking at a reality and you're unhappy with it. And, you know, as the law of attraction says, you know, what you think of is what expands. And so many of us get so hooked on the current system and so lost in its noise that we forget our power as creators and leaders to say, well, why don't we just go ahead and create something that would work? And then we start growing that, you know.
Right.
So he's really awesome. Somebody who I clearly should learn more about. I've always grabbed his quotes on the go, but he's definitely someone I would absolutely recommend. And then there's Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, and he's the leader of the Equal Justice Institute,
Right.
and they're in Alabama, and they're really amazing because they are forcing the American society to first of all admit that slavery happened, and therefore these were the consequences of it. Number one, and then they are bringing to the surface the atrocities that happened around the lynchings and all sorts of things that happened during that era that people have not fully come to accept, which then means we run the risk of things like that happening again in the future, because you never fully learn until you first of all been accountable to say these things did happen, and then create social spaces where people can come to learn about how these things came to place and how we can avoid becoming that society again. You know, so that for me, Brian Stevenson is definitely someone who is at the very top.
So Mpumi, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I mean, Mpumi Nobiva, I'm on LinkedIn. I have my
Yeah.
website, mpuminobiva.com. We're currently rebranding the website, but I mean, any generic information, you'll find it. I built it myself, so I'm just going to put that out there so people don't have high expectations. But my new one coming out in March is going to look and feel much better. But yeah, and then of course I'm on social media, you know, Mpumi_Nobiva. That's on my Twitter, my Instagram. People can always access me. And my email is info@mpuminobiva.com. So that's my private email, my public email that people can reach out to.
Right. And where can our listeners follow your thought leadership? Maybe on your blog or on your Twitter?
Yeah, so starting in March, it's all going to come from mpuminobiva.com.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So last but not least, Mpumi, is there one thing that you would really ask future leaders to take away from this interview and implement in their own leadership?
It would be to take the time to really get to know yourself.
Right.
Take the time to do the work. You know, there's nothing wrong with therapy. There's nothing wrong with counseling. There's nothing wrong with sharing your story in whichever way, shape, or form. Do the work, because wherever you go, there you shall be. And you can never run from you know, especially, and I say this because I work with people who are very vulnerable and much like myself have come from, you know, tragedies, and those realities have an imprint. Poverty alone is a tragedy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the way you live in poverty, always on survival instinct. And so when you're living in that space, it's very wise to find ways to break out of those realities and then do the work that it takes to confront those realities so that you break free from the chains that have already been built around your heart and consciousness. Do the work. And then, you know, in whichever shape, way, or form, make sure that you leave your mark. You know, I happen to love being on stage. I'm sure you can tell I love talking, which is why it works for me. But I always say to people, you don't have to stand in front of crowds. You don't have to do anything outside of yourself, but you have to make your mark. We have to know that. And that's where you can come out and live in your greatest potential, and you get to decide what that looks like. Nobody else decides. So even though I went to the Oprah School, even though I'm mentored by powerful, great leaders, I still get to decide who Mpumi Nobiva is, and I decide what my legacy will be. And that for me is a privilege, and one that I hope people are courageous enough to step into.
Well, Mpumi, thank you so much for your inspiration. In fact, thank you so much for helping us to build the future. You really are a great inspiration. You truly lead by example, and I'm truly humbled by what you're doing. And I hope to see you soon in South Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. Yeah.